Hello, everyone. And today, wanted to talk a little bit about the idea of faith, which is integral to a lot of spiritual systems and spiritual practices. It seems to be an important component of such. But Buddhism is a non-theistic tradition, which is to say, the idea of God is an open question. Even if we say God, we are immediately prejudicing that toward a gender, toward a culture, toward a relationship in a way. You know, I know that with my work in recovery, that works a lot with a higher power. I actually came to sort of realize that any interpretation of a higher power, if I see it as a male above me, my initial reaction is going to be to try to rebel against that and create an antipathy to it. Um, which is not the best approach, but it is kind of my programming. So it's interesting when we pinpoint an object of our devotion or an object of our faith, if it's a very solid thing, then we can argue with anything solid because things that are solid are by nature temporary. It's interesting, isn't it? Maybe it's not the way we think of things, but material things are by nature temporary and they will dissolve and reconstruct and reassemble into other things. But material things are really not permanent and they're not of the spirit. They're absolutely an important component to our life and our life experience. Material things are very important in terms of a livelihood, in terms of building a world in which we live in. But finding a real sort of faith in material things is not necessarily the best approach. One thing in my coaching training that I've experienced, and it's kind of a truism that coaches will say, or in the trainings you get, which is that people are not inspired by money. They're frightened of money. They crave money. They demand money. They want money. They think of money constantly, but they are not inspired by it. So if somebody says, I want to make more money, that's not really a self affirming statement in any way other than expressing their fear that they're not making enough money. To actually have faith in something you believe in is a more spiritual, I think, experience. It's something that's deeper and richer and something that can't really be argued with. And because of that, highly personal experience. I have faith that my practice will lead me to compassion, kindness. I have faith that in my 12-step practice, I will free myself of the kind of patterns that have kept me an addict and kept me enslaved within myself. I have faith that if I work on my kindness and compassion, I will become an interesting and more agreeable individual. But in terms of faith that I will become a rich and wealthy and powerful person, in terms of faith that the world will actually save itself from its craziness and its indulgence, I'm not really sure how to approach those things. And they seem a little inconsequential to me because it seems like you're putting your faith in something that then can either be proven or disproven. And that doesn't really make sense to me. We have a lot of difficulties in our society, and we have a lot of difficulties in our culture, and we have a lot of difficulties in our world. And to just believe that they will magically disappear because we're so wonderful as human beings. I don't know, it's a little naive to me. It really is. Because the jury is out as to whether this planet has housed us and accepted us because we were meant to be here, or whether we're just another experience of flora and fauna upon the planet that will run its course and leave as other things will develop. And you might have your own thoughts about this. This is my own little Joeism, but I do think that the ascendants of humanity may be our technological selves. It may be the artificial intelligence, which actually will become, I believe, as many people do, actual intelligence, and will populate other planets. That might be our legacy. But the idea that we will remain these flesh and blood creatures that are constantly warring with each other to prove our personal supremacy seems like that's going to play itself out at some point. Doesn't seem to be any aspect of developing beyond that. However, 2,500 years ago, Prince Shakyamuni sat beneath a tree and actually stopped all the speculation, stopped all the starvation, stopped all the trying, stopped all the practicing, and actually learned how to just be, to calm down and be. And in the center of the maelstrom of reality, of our confusion on the planet, on our earth, was this quiet point of enlightenment, this connection that he had. And when he attained enlightenment, he touched the earth. And when somebody asked him, inspired by his radiance, who he was, he realized he had gone beyond designations of name, label, and he just said, I'm enlightened. I'm awake, which is what Buddha means, the awakened one. As the story goes, the person responded, how do you know? And he touched the earth in that very famous gesture, that mudra, and you'll see statues of it, the earth touching mudra. And he just touched the earth. And he said, well, the earth is my witness. And for once in the history of humanity, somebody did something completely authentic and present and purposeful that wasn't dependent upon other people's approval. That wasn't done for anybody to say, hey, good job. That wasn't done to garner disciples. That wasn't done to have money or wealth or fame or any of the material things. It was an absolute, honest connection that he had with the present moment and the earth. And there's lots of then miraculous hagiographic stories of, the flora and fauna opening and descending around him to accept him, and the deer coming to listen to his teachings. And whether or not any of that is true, I have no idea, nor do I care, because the essential element is the idea that at the core of every human being is the possibility of our enlightenment, our complete awakening, that we have that. And as Stephen pointed out earlier, with the idea that cessation is always with us, so is our enlightenment always with us. We cover it up as though we're embarrassed about it. We hide it. We protect it by enslaving it. in these Gorgon-like costumes of aggression and posturing. We spend all our enlightened activity trying to prove we're better than the person next to us or be accepted by the ones on the other side of us. We spend all this time in complete relationship to everything that doesn't make any difference, and frequently miss the absolute truth of the actual magic of our experience. If you want to believe in magic, in the supernatural, look at your own body. How the hell did this happen? How did this chance meeting of carbon and nitrogen come together and create this? And of course, you could explain that away by saying it must be the design of an all-powerful deity. And that's an idea. That's a fine idea. But that wasn't the Buddha's experience. It was just he and the earth and nothing else, that direct, naked contact to now. Opening his heart to his experience in the present moment. And in that way was the dawning of his own compassion. Because after that, people asked him, encouraged him, will you teach? You've got the juice, my friend. You've got the mojo. Will you teach us? Will you show us? Because this was a very spiritually materialist time. Sometimes they say this period of the Buddha's life was not unlike the 60s and early 70s in Western culture, where people were really flocking to these spiritual principles, these ideas, and particularly the Indian ideas, which are these millennia old sort of ideas, the development of cosmology and creation, the oldest existing spiritual systems, India and China, actually sort of gave birth to the Tibetan point of view. The upper Himalayas, the southernmost Himalayas, where the Buddha was born, became the kind of cradle of this awakening, which had existed for a long time. But by the same token, Buddha awoke with no fanfare and with no drama. And when he did, his heart awoke. And he became this person that was able to radiate loving kindness and compassion, Maitri and Karuna, to the beings around him. And that was felt apparently by the beings around him. It was like an energetic transmission, so to speak. It didn't have anything to do with the material needs of the time. And it transcended all of the materialism of the various spiritual quests that people were doing all around him. It created his own thing, a reformist sort of movement, if you will, that pulled things away from the hierarchy and the confusion and the conflagration of the spiritual sort of systems that occurred, and made everything equal and present and egalitarian. Just basically brought it all back to the earth. Anyone could attain enlightenment, and all of us had that Buddha nature within us, regardless of race, creed, religious orientation, regardless of skin color, regardless of our economic sort of situation. And this in a culture that was very stratified in terms of their caste system. that believed that that was indomitable, that that was written, that was your destiny to live within your caste. Or perhaps more progressive readings of that, to work for a lifetime through your caste to eventually ascend to a level high enough to attain some kind of liberation. The Buddha said, liberation is now, and it's equally available to all of us. And you don't have to play that game, and you don't have to be part of any system. It's just about you being honest with you, and you being willing to be completely present with you. So lots of spiritual traditions have this idea of faith. In fact, people will say things like, I'm a person of faith, and I wonder what that means. I never understood really what that means. It means believe that something good will happen eventually to the world. That could be. Or it might mean that you have a very strong belief in a Godhead or a deity that you believe has a plan for you. And I totally accept that. I have no reason to doubt that. It's not my experience, so I can't, buy into that in my own sort of personal cosmology. But I respect people that feel that way because they have a real kind of fortitude, and they faith gives them a sense of confidence and belief that I think often I have lost as a Buddhist. I just didn't have it, I didn't thank Buddha every day. I didn't feel myself indebted to the Buddha's teachings to work through possibilities for myself. It was really quite different, and I felt a little ripped off that being in a theistic tradition, we didn't have something to pray to. And then I actually started studying more about the Tibetan Buddhist principles that I had already been working with. And one of the things that my primary teacher, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, he and his son are my primary teachers, that Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche said that faith in the Buddhist tradition is faith in the present moment and the belief that you can do it. That if you were to train your mind to just be here now, that you would activate that enlightened gene within you, and you would have the wisdom to be able to deal with your life. And if you messed it up, you would have the wisdom to be able to learn from that mistake and continue forward. That this application of you and your life was the whole point and purpose of being alive, not another life outside of this life, not some fantastical place we might attain to after we die. And those things may well be true, but to Buddhists, here is nirvana. The cessation of suffering, as Stephen said, is now. It's happening right now, as well as the suffering, that they are not separate and they're not different. We have enlightenment and we have neurosis, and these things are magically and brilliantly happening even in this moment. And we could look one way and see just the problems of the world because we're looking through the eyes of materialism and trying to make things work. Or we could look through the eyes of the spirit and realize that things are magically working, that they've really come together in these powerful and profound ways. That every time a bird sings, it could remind you of enlightenment and awakening. And every time the wind blows, it could remind you that you're alive, and that's a miracle. And people are looking for these grand miracles to take them away from the mundane life that they live, and they, I think, may be missing the point. That the magic is that we're here right now. And the magic is that we can actually open our hearts and love each other right now in the present moment. That the magic is who we are at this point in our life. So I wanted to end with a joke, which some of you know. It's an old trope. It's well worn and well told, and it's also told in Buddhist and Christian, and I'm sure other contexts as well. And it's about the pastor and the flood, and I'm sure some of you know it. And the pastor is praying, and there's been warnings about a flood coming, and people have been urged by the authorities, the government, etc., to evacuate this area, including where this pastor's church was. And the pastor felt like his faith would bring his flock through this turmoil. He didn't have to go anywhere. He didn't have to run away. He didn't have to wear a mask to save himself. He could just pray to his God. And the actual flood started happening. It started flooding the streets of the town, and people really started leaving en masse, to the extent that buses were brought in to pick people up and take them away to higher ground. And the pastor refused the bus and encouraged his flock to stay with him. And some of the flock got on the buses, but the pastor had convinced some to stay and continue in his all night prayer, vigil, and ritual. And then what happened was the last communications came over the airwaves and said that there was uh, the Coast Guard was coming with the encroaching water and sending out little boats for the remaining people. And they encouraged, in particularly with loudspeakers, to the pastor and his remaining flock to get on these boats. And the pastor refused. Most of his flock left, and he was left alone with one little person um, named Ernie. And he and Ernie were kind of left with the downpour and the water coming up and coming in, and the boats left them and they continued their prayer. And he felt really close to his God at this point. And then helicopters came overhead and they dropped a rope down and they said, "This is, I promise you, your last chance." And at this point, the water had come into the church and was up over his legs. And Ernie got scared and actually reached for the ladder. And the pastor kept praying. And the rope went up, the helicopter left, Ernie left the pastor alone. The water came in and drowned the pastor, who died and woke up in heaven. And he was pissed. He was really, really pissed. And so St. Peter or Michael or whoever it is that did that kind of work for the Lord came up and said, "Hey, what's going on? You're soaking wet." And he said, "Yeah, I'm a little upset. I was told that the prayer would save me, and I kept praying, and here I am dead." And the Lord came into the room and smiled at him and said, "I sent you a bus, I sent you a boat, I sent you a helicopter. I did everything I could." So the spiritual path, from at least a Buddhist point of view, but I think also interpreted this way in a lot of Christian ideas, is how we actualize it, how we actually create the possibility of magic in our own lives. Can we get on the boat and save ourselves? Or are we just going to sit here and wait for the blessings that be to save us? And maybe they never will. And I think inside we know that that's not going to happen. So people go to church on Sunday and they say the rosary, but do they really have faith? Do they actually really believe? And I think a lot of people struggle with that. because maybe those things aren't really true that way. But if we develop confidence, the absolute confidence to believe in ourselves and to be able to act non-aggressively and purposefully in our lives, I think we could have faith in ourselves. And quite miraculously, we could have faith in not knowing what's going to happen next. Faith in the openness of possibility. That instead of saying, this is what's going to happen, that we're saying, whatever happens, I'm going to be here for it and be grateful that I'm here and be present with this. I have faith that I will develop that level of confidence in my life. And that's what I would like. Not some supernatural situation that's going to save me and make something amazing happen for me, but that I could actually just learn to live humbly and directly right here, right now, touching earth, connected to it, present with my experience. So thank you.